Right, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. My name is Beaumont-Smith. I am the Chief Exec of Fulcrum Infrastructure Group. We are investors in 6 LIFT companies across England, and I've also recently been appointed as the Chair of the LIFT Council. The LIFT Council is a representative body representing both investors and service providers to LIFT buildings across England. So one of the things that we've been wanting to do as the LIFT Council is to kind of improve an awareness and understanding of what LIFT is and what LIFT's achieved over the last 20 years as we mark the 20-year anniversary of LIFT. So a kind of a quick recap of what the LIFT model is for those of you who aren't so familiar with it. So the LIFT model was established about 20 years ago with the idea of bringing the local NHS, the Department of Health and private investors together to develop and deliver quality community health facilities across England. So far, the LIFT programme has delivered 350 new health buildings across England, with 9 out of 10 of those health buildings being located in areas of above average health needs. I think a really important part of the message that we want to get is that LIFT isn't only about developing and delivering new health buildings, but LIFT companies see themselves as part of the kind of local estate and local health economy, understanding the health needs of that community and working closely with the NHS locally to support delivery of health services. And I think Tim will cover a little bit more of that in detail about the work that they've been doing in Hull. So hopefully that will be a live example of what we've been able to deliver. So really, LIFT companies are an estates partner with a wide range of skills and expertise. And many people who've been involved in LIFT have been involved in LIFT for a very long time. For me, what I feel really proud about being involved in LIFT is the way that LIFT companies have embedded themselves locally and work closely with the local system to understand how to support delivery of health needs. Everybody I've worked with is really committed to this. And I think that's one of the things that we wanted to get across with a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment, is that commitment and enthusiasm and the passion for what we do and why we believe it's so important. So as part of marking the 20th anniversary of LIFT, we were all delighted that Boris Johnson recognised the major benefits that the LIFT programme had delivered in improving and modernising community health facilities. So while it's great to have recognition from the current Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, I think one of the points that we wanted to make is that the LIFT programme has received cross-party political support over a number of years. And has kind of seen a number of different governments and various NHS restructurings. I'm delighted that we've got Alan Johnson joining us today to talk about his experience in the LIFT programme, and we had Lord Bradley last week talking about his involvement in the LIFT programme. It was really exciting. Last month, we celebrated the first anniversary of one of the latest LIFT buildings to become operational in Dulwich. The Tessa Jowell Health Centre, named after the late Tessa Jowell in recognition of the huge commitment and contribution she's made to healthcare in her local constituency, but also in particular to delivering that specific project. So I think hopefully it's clear that the LIFT programme has enjoyed good cross-party political support over a number of years, but understandably is caught up in this loop of concern around private investment in the NHS. So one thing that we wanted to make clear is that the LIFT is not a PFI model, it's a partnership model. And as part of that partnership, the government holds a 40% stake in LIFT companies through community health partnerships. So Community Health Partnerships is a Department of Health owned company and a key part of the NHS family. So not only do they have an ownership in the LIFT company, but also the governance around the way that LIFT companies work is specifically designed to ensure that that partnership is a key element of that. And for all of us involved in LIFT, that strong partnership with CHP is one of the core principles of how LIFT operates and has operated well. We also acknowledge that value for money in these kind of structures is always an important element to take into account. And so we're very happy to say that we've got 2 separate National Audit Office reports which affirm the value for money that the LIFT programme has delivered. As part of CHP's role in this partnership, they have a crucial voice in how these assets are managed and support the local needs of the health system. Ultimately, both us and CHP are aligned to ensure that we provide high quality estate that delivers or supports in delivery of an integrated model for care. And I think that there are many examples of how Lift has done this over the last 20 years and how that partnership has supported in dealing with a number of challenges that we've come across in that time period, but also in celebrating the successes of some of the great things that we've achieved. And that for us is kind of the real incentive of what we're trying to get across with celebrating this 20 years of Lift. I think the last 12 months and everything that COVID has thrown to everybody has been a kind of real demonstration of how that partnership has worked. And I think everybody within the Lift model, but also within the NHS, would be able to attribute to how we've worked together in partnership to deal with some of the challenges that COVID has thrown up. And Lift buildings have been a key part of the kind of community effort in the defense against COVID, with originally looking at things like testing centers and later where you have Lift buildings operating as vaccine hubs. So I think we're all very proud to have been part of that. And we would look forward to how we can continue to learn the lessons that we have over the last 12 months to see how we can support delivery for many years to come. So hopefully I have done a good job at kind of expressing how proud we feel of what we've achieved and what we're wanting to achieve in the future. And through this kind of discussion, we'll get some more live examples of what that looks like. So with that in mind, I'd like to hand over to Alan Johnson to talk about his experience.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Well, what is it now? 4 years ago, I left a crumbling building in Westminster, determined to join Citycare and deal with some of the crumbling buildings we've got in the NHS. Lift is probably the most successful public-private partnership with the least inspiring name, Local Investment Finance Trust. And when I was health secretary and a local MP, it struck me that not many people knew about this. And everyone was aware by then of three initials, PFI. And Lift got tarred with the brush of PFI, if you like. But it is important to recognize that if you read Rudolf Klein, the great historian of the NHS, he points out that right from the beginning of the NHS, there's been this problem with the infrastructure, a problem getting capital investment into what should have been high-class buildings to match the high-class service that nurses and doctors were providing. When I came to Hull in 1997, where I'm speaking from now, the maternity hospital was in an early 19th century workhouse 6 miles from Hull Royal Infirmary. So if a woman had problems in childbirth, she had to be sent in an ambulance 6 miles, hoping that the bridge over the River Hull was down. And it was because of that that John Major's government introduced PFI. The only thing I'll say about PFI is in the 20 years before PFI was introduced, 4 hospitals were built in this country. In the 20 years after PFI was introduced, 104 hospitals were introduced. Now, this issue that's tainted the whole concept of public-private partnership, I just need to touch upon. Citycare Lift is not a PFI. Why isn't it a PFI? Because the public sector own 40%. Traditionally in PFIs, they own 10%. Because in Lift projects, it's the developer, the NHS, that drives it, not the contractors, as in PFI. And thirdly, Lift is focused on the whole life of the project, the long-term value of the project, and is very much part of the NHS principles. And Lift is also, of course, not aimed at the acute sector. I mean, developers and finance tended to go towards hospitals because they're great big buildings. Primary care, which are much more disparate, were left out of that. It didn't attract private sector funding, and it's always been fragmented and piecemeal. So GPs virtually set up where they like and how they like. And many of them set up as single-handed practices in terraced housing, that was substandard, obviously substandard. The word crumbling is a good description of many of them. And of course, after Harold Shipman, the idea of single-handed GPs became less attractive, let alone the buildings that they were working out of. And in 1948, when the NHS was created, a leaflet was put through everybody's door, and it told them what to expect from this amazing new service. And it told them about the hospitals, and it told them about the dentistry, and it told them about, at that stage, free glasses, free prescriptions. But it also said, right at the end of the leaflet that went through everybody's door, there will be a health centre in every community. So the architects of the NHS envisaged doing something about this. Instead of that, rather like the other great 1940s legislation, Butler's Great Education Act, promised technical schools that never developed. In the NHS, health centres were promised, and very few, tiny, infinitesimal number were actually built. And so here was Lift looking to deal with all of that, the single-handed practices, the substandard premises that they occupied out of. And then one other issue as well, which was the need to bring health services closer to the population. People trooping to hospital backwards and forwards, bus journeys or whatever, for things that were perfectly capable of being provided in the community if there was the correct infrastructure. Things like physiotherapy, things like podiatry, things like speech and language therapy, things like occupational therapy, a whole list of things that can now be provided. Around Hull, we've got 13 iconic health centres now. Many of them provide these services. That's, of course, a matter for the NHS, but the first principle is to have the premises available for them to do that in the local community. The final issue I'll mention that Lift was due to to deal with is health inequalities. Now, we know if you're there in Westminster, if you step on the Jubilee line and go 7 stops to Canning Town, your life expectancy will reduce by a year at every stop. It's got nothing to do with the tube, by the way. You get the same result if you go by bus. But these terrible inequalities are usually nothing to do with health. They're about education. They're about housing. They're about a whole series of other things, as the great world expert on this, Michael Marmot, would say, who's a Brit. But this bit is so-called under-doctored areas, because GPs choose where to set up. Many of them choose to set up in, not all of them, of course, but many of them do, in more leafy suburbs, and the inner cities suffer as a result. Dr. Julian Tudor-Hart's inverse care law: the people who need access to care the most have the least access to it. So there's an issue here about, dare I say it, levelling up as well as building back better. And those health centres were deliberately placed into areas where they had a low density of GPs for the population. So I don't think I need to talk about the success of Lift, because as Sarah mentioned, it's been verified more than once. It's a huge success story. Because it's got mixed up with PFI, there's almost been a kind of hold on it since the budget of 2018. And we need to get around that. But this is about a celebration of 20 years of success. The final point I want to make is, if you look at the NHS's 10-year plan published year before last, which the government are going to legislate for, excellent stuff in there, by the way. One of the issues is triple integration. So Simon Stevens talks of triple integration. That's integrating primary with specialist care, mental health with physical health, and of course, healthcare with social care. Those 3 integrations that need to take place. You're going to need an infrastructure to do that. And you don't need to go away and reinvent one. You have the expertise there, a little bit like a surgeon now, we understand, whereas, you know, perhaps 40 years ago we didn't. It's no good going to a general hospital to have a surgeon carry out a procedure that they only do once or twice a year. Now you have specialists on stroke care, on colorectal surgery, etc. Well, on buildings and construction and getting the best deal for the public sector, for the taxpayer, we also have this expertise now concentrated. Where is it concentrated? In 49 lift companies, of which Hull Citycare, which I'm proud to be the independent chair, is one. Now I'm going to hand over to my good friend, the chief executive of Hull Citycare, Tim Wigglesworth, to give a presentation on some of the important achievements and the actual buildings we've constructed in the 20 years since the lift was developed.
Thanks, Alan. Good afternoon, everybody. I do promise not to present and PowerPoint you to death here. My name's Tim Wigglesworth. I am, as Alan said, Chief Exec of Hull Citycare. I'm really proud to be there. The pride that we all share here. I am a Hull boy, born and bred, so it gives me immense satisfaction to do the role that I do and to be able to give back to the community that I was born and raised and have always lived in. What I wanted to do is just share a few thoughts and observations from our particular journey over the last few years. We are 13 buildings strong now. We've got another new one on the way, which I'll mention briefly. In some respect, it's very easy for lift to get, for the focus to be on the buildings themselves. But as a business, we have our higher purpose as a business is to improve the health and well-being of people who live in Hull. So in that sense, it's got nothing to do with the buildings, but in other senses, it's got everything to do with them, because buildings, of course, act as a very great enabler. And it's no different to education, where we've seen some significant programs to build and create the right facilities for the great work that healthcare professionals deliver. The other thing that we've seen is some significant, and I will throw some numbers at you unashamedly here. We've seen some really impressive numbers that come out of the programme. Whilst I'm reflecting on Hull, you can multiply this across 48 other lift companies across the country here. We've seen things like 80% or more than 80% of people who live in Hull now access their primary and community services through our estate. We've seen close to 70% of GP premises go from that very traditional, front room of a two-down house into 21st century buildings, which is where people expect their healthcare to be provided from, and rightly so. People are proud of it, but it's the least that they deserve and expect. We've also seen, in terms of social value, which has become a very, very significant field in its own right. We've probably always understood this, but we've never badged it in the way that we do now. Something like £250 million, when you start to apply those social and economic multipliers off the back of the original investment. Tremendous number of new jobs. We are really proud of our high percentage of local labour, and also that education and apprenticeship opportunity that we've managed to create. So when you add all of that together, this is a significant programme across the country, which, as Alan said and Sarah said, has been running for 20 years. And it almost feels like one of the best kept secrets, because I fully accept that to the man on the street, the man and the woman on the street, they don't really understand or are bothered about that organisational badge on the building, but they just want something in their community that will do what they need it to do. And that's what Lift has done over the years. What we're also seeing is, as Alan's referenced, that NHS long-term plan and the whole landscape of the NHS starting to change again now. The predominance of integrated care systems, which is now starting to come to the fore, CCGs starting to ease away from their responsibilities. What we do find is that the NHS lift estate is a really key part of that jigsaw, irrespective again of the organisational architecture of the NHS. And these lift assets, 300 plus of them across the country, they're all assets of strategic importance. They're all relatively new buildings. They're in good condition. They are maintained in good condition. Therefore, it's an expectation that they will continue to play a significant part in the NHS from here on. What we've also got, which some of you may be aware of, but others may not, is that the NHS has a tremendously fragmented estate in terms of its ownership and how it's actually run and controlled. and that is split across a whole range of public and private bodies, which doesn't always get dealt with in a coherent way. What the NHS Lift public-private partnership does is bring the best of the public sector and the private sector together. And that's the point of it. It's all about taking the best bits from each, merging them together, and 2 and 2 equaling 5 or 6 or 7. So we do realise that we've got a little bit of education stroke perception to deal with in all of this. But for us in Hull, and I suspect for all of our colleagues across the country in the Lift world, this has always been about a very locally delivered partnership. We are very lucky here, and I do count our blessings on a regular basis. We've had the benefit of a very high-performing CCG, one that's been consistently rated as outstanding. We've got people within that organisation who've always seen the art of the possible with the Lift estate, and that they've latched onto that. And that's something that we're really grateful for. In Hull, our local authority, for various reasons, has been slightly less engaged. They are supporters, but they're not necessarily stitched in as shareholders. That's different in other parts of the country. So you do see this local dynamic coming to play here. But equally, local authorities will play an increasing part in the future of how services are delivered in the new world. As I said before, this goes beyond buildings. It's about other expertise that we can bring to the table from the people who work in Lift world. There is a capability and a capacity that is there to support the health system. We've seen some very live examples over the last 12 or 15 months, as Sarah touched on, with COVID and COVID vaccination. I've had quite a key role really in our local area, just in terms of trying to help pull together the whole premises part of the vaccination program, and that's something that's given me a tremendous amount of reward when I reflect on it. And that's come about because of our position, the networks and the relationships that we've built over the years. So, and also what I would say is that it was originally established for primary care, but we've seen it extend across our estate and in other parts of the country to touch upon mental health and other schemes. One of the schemes that I think Alan is probably most proud of is a building called the Jean Bishop Integrated Care Centre, which isn't actually primary care led. What it was a CCG who were very brave and understood that people with frailties, not just elderly people, but predominantly elderly people, they tend to be, in the older way of doing things, they tended to be like hamsters on the outside of the wheel, having to go to different places at different times to access the services that they need. What the CCG did was reverse that model and put the patient very much at the centre of the wheel, with the services revolving around it. Yes, it needed a new building to facilitate that, but again, that building was very much the enabler of what has been a hugely successful service transformation. Some of the numbers which are on the screen there speak for themselves. Alan, I know that when you've been, I don't want to put words in your mouth with this, but we've had various people who've come and looked at this building, including some of your people that when you were health secretary, you were in that world of. What's your take on the Jean Bishop particularly?
Well, I would only say that when Sir David Nicholson came, who was chief executive of the NHS prior to Simon Stevens, and he's not a man prone to hyperbole. He said he'd never seen anything like it. It was something that we'd spoken about in the NHS for years, integrating care services for the most vulnerable, the most elderly, and we'd achieved it. The other one is that they're creating a care plan for all the over 80s. One of the over 80s in Hull is a Mr. J. Prescott from East Hull, and he went there for his test and to get his program together. And he is another man who's not prone to hyperbole, but he said it's the best NHS development he's seen in his time in politics. So it's been a great success.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, well, so that's been a quick skate through our own version of the last 20 years. Looking to the future, we do acknowledge that we've not finished yet. Alan touched upon the hiatus that we've seen in the Lift programme. We had a scheme which is actually in Emma's constituency, who's on the call, in West Hull, which is a part of Hull which has traditionally been underserved by fit and proper premises. And yet, conversely, we had one of the most successful practices in the city, again, operating out of that mix of residential houses that have been simply knocked together to accommodate them. That isn't 21st century healthcare in a way that I understand. It's taken us quite a while, but I'm really pleased that this is a building that's now on the ground. Because of the challenges with the LIFT programme, we've had to find a different model. We were innovative. We worked with our partners, our public sector partners at CHP to do this. And given the will of all parties, we've managed to get a scheme that's been on the ground since last November and is due to open at the back end of this year. And again, what I'm really pleased about is that that's going to provide improved facilities for people who live in our community. That's what my job and our job is all about. People want the right care in the right place at the right time, and it's no more complicated than that. It's a very simple equation. We play our part in that. We can play our part, and here's very much tomorrow the same.